Alright, so we're going to do a little walkthrough of my system, and mostly covering the wiring, and why you should definitely have a fuse before your back battery. A lot of people are saying you don't need one. I guess this is just my opinion, but this is why I think you do need one. So, we'll start with, I guess the alternator. Is way down in there. Those two black heat shrink are negative grounds. One's for the alternator going down to the frame. The other one is a ground from the alternator going up and around to the battery. So the alternator is what charges your system or gives your vehicle power when it's running, obviously. The positive run I don't have on yet, but it will run from the positive of the alternator up to the positive of the battery. And pretty much that'll charge your battery when the vehicle's running. So then we have this chassis ground connects there and connects down in there. That grounds the chassis to the battery. That was a stock ground. I just added it to my new battery terminals. This ground here is for my battery charger. It just plugs in, runs to this charger. And then the other post of it is on this side over here. It just runs to a quick connect plug for the charger. This white heat shrink, big cable that goes, that's my power run back to my amp. We'll get to that in a minute. These two down here, one runs to that relay. That's positive, running to the relay. And then from the relay, it'll run across and over to this wire loom here. That red wire there runs up through this pillar into the underneath the headliner or above the headliner, and then into the light bar. And then the light bar is grounded to the frame or to the chassis. The other small red wire that runs along here is a 10 gauge power wire to go to my stereo because it has a built-in 4-channel amp. Got a fuse. And back to this big cable, runs to this 250 amp fuse, 0 gauge welding wire, should carry about 300 amps, but I have a 250 amp fuse just to be safe. And then both of those wires run together through the firewall down there. You can kind of see it. It does go through a grommet. Okay. And then that comes into the footwell and the passenger. You can't see it, but it's in there. It's under the carpet. And then it branches off. The stereo wire comes up and over to the stereo. The 0 gauge runs over to the side, down along this side here, comes through this little humped bracket right here for the seat, runs back past this seat bracket here, runs back along here, runs up through this plastic. It's actually underneath of it. And then it runs into this. There's a little cavity here. And then it runs around and up right there. Also have a piece of hose for a grommet there. Two, a fuse. Another 250 amp fuse, matches the one in the front. And then we have a short piece that goes to the battery. Now we come from the battery, positive terminal, comes down along here, runs across, sorry about the light, but it runs up to the amp. And I do have another fuse right here, CT, which is what amp I have, the AT1400. recommended to put a fuse in line before the amp, so I did. Fuses save your ass, that's what they do. If that wire here, which is bent around and goes up into the amp, was to short, that would protect it. Or if the amp draws too much current, if something internal to the amp happened to short, that would also blow, cut off power. So, we'll go back to the negatives. Below it here, the negative runs down, runs through a grommet in the floor, and goes to the frame. That's the negative for the amp. The battery does the same. This wire here, with the black heat shrink, connects down through a grommet in the floor to the frame. And then, from those two grounds, from the amp and the battery, there's a cable connecting the two together. Some people ask why I didn't run a negative run from the battery all the way over to the amp. Well, look how clean this looks. Positive coming down, positive goes over. Got the positive speaker wire running along the top of it because the speaker wire comes from the center terminals around the box, down, runs over to the amp. Now, people say, why didn't you run a ground to the amp? Well, one, would have kind of ruined the look I was going for. But two, if I were to do that, I would have to, or I would prefer to have run dual inputs on the amp and had not just a run of power and ground, but 2 runs of power coming from the battery to the amp if I had dual inputs, 1 run of ground coming from the battery to the amp, and also a run of ground from the amp down to the frame. Pretty much the more grounds the better. However, I didn't want to get dual inputs, so I ran the battery to the frame, the amp to the frame, and connected those 2, which pretty much is like running the battery to the amp. But you also have the extra ground of both frame grounds. And I'll show you all the subs. I know you want to see those. The box has lights, turns on with this door switch. When the door closes, they turn off. When the door opens, they turn on. We got an arrow port in there. We got some bracing, some really cool red stain that I made. 9 Summo 6.5. And if you guys want more info on it, it's all on my Facebook page. But right now we're just sticking to the wiring. Now people say you don't need the fuse before the back battery. Technically, this is before the back battery if you're coming from the front. Now, let's say, since my power wire pretty much runs right along here, if I were to pull out in front of somebody, or somebody didn't stop at a stop sign, and I got T-boned, everything in your car, metal, is negative. So all of this here, metal, is a negative or a ground from the battery, because we have this coming to the body, we have this ground going to the alternator, which also goes down to the frame. So everything metal in your car is negative. So since I have this positive run, if something were to happen in here, whether it rubs in this bracket here, or whether, if anything happened, that wire would short, because something would rub through the casing, or it gets smashed. And if that positive copper inside of the insulation touches metal, it will short. So, to protect from a short, and that could happen anywhere along that run. It could happen right here, although it's very unlikely. There's nothing metal around it, but it could happen. It could happen where it goes through the firewall. It could happen anywhere along where the power wire runs through. It could also happen right there where that power wire comes through the grommet. So, if it shorts anywhere along that cable, the fuse will blow because that entire run will get hot. And when fuses get hot, they blow. When too much amperage goes through the fuse, it will blow. So, if we have this positive here coming into the fuse and going to the wire, if that wire shorts and this fuse blows, this battery or this cable connected to the positive terminal is no longer connected to that wire because that fuse blew. However, people are saying that you don't need the fuse in the back before the battery. So if that wire runs through here, if it were to get shorted and you did not have that fuse there, right there, then this positive terminal of this battery would be connected, wherever that wire decided to short, to negative. And since this ground is connected to negative, what you're doing is you're shorting out the back battery. It's kind of common sense, guys. So, if you have a short, this fuse will also blow. And you need that, because now, this positive run goes to the fuse. If the fuse is blown, this wire is no longer connected to that one because the fuse is blown. So, from that lug on that wire, all the way from the length of the wire to this lug here is shorted. But it's not connected to anything because this fuse here and the fuse back there blew. So you're fine. Now, if you did not have that fuse back there, then wherever that wire decided to short would slowly or pretty quickly, depending on how good the short is, it'll heat up. And once it starts to heat up, you get the insulation to melt, you get a fire. So, always have a fuse in the front. If you have a battery in the back, fuse before the battery. Okay? And people are saying if you're running from the alternator straight to the back battery, you don't need a fuse on it. Well, if your car is off, that alternator is not producing power. Right? It's not spinning. But you have your front battery is connected to it. So, you have power from the front battery. You have power from the back battery. If that wire shorts anywhere and you don't have a fuse protecting that wire, it's going to melt. It's going to heat up. Your car is going to catch on fire. Depending how quickly you can stop it. So, fuses. Oh, maybe I should explain the one on the amp a little farther. If this wire down here that runs from my battery over to the amp, if it shorts anywhere from this terminal here all the way before that fuse, if it shorts, let's say, here, which it won't because this is wood and that's wood and there's carpet, but if it does, there's no fuse to protect this wire. It'll protect my amp, which is a pretty nice amp, but it will not protect the wire or the battery. So I should have a fuse here, but I don't, because I'm fairly confident that this wood is not ground. Just so you guys know that was sarcasm. But yeah. So, like it, share it to everybody you know, because fuses are important. Also, haven't gotten a picture of that yet. We got the Crescendo 12 Voltronics GP Sky High North Star CT Sounds, Massive, and CN Graphics. They did most of my decals. Give y'all another picture shot of the subs. I guess I'll explain the terminals a little bit. It looks like a mess. It kind of is. But you got all the subs. These 5 that are inverted are wired to that top terminal, negative, positive. The ones on the bottom are also wired the same way. You can kind of see them in there. They're all in parallel. 9 single 4 ohm voice coils should be 0.44 ohms. Some were 4.2, 4.1. I think I had one that was even 3.7. But it all equals out to about half an ohm, which the CT Sounds 1400, it's fine. They can run at half ohm, no problem. We got the LED lights. Covered those. 6-inch precision port. Plasti dipped it red. We got these braces. Plasti dipped those, I believe it was gunmetal gray. And then we got this embossed logo here. That's pretty cool. Massive. 3D. The front and back walls, so this one here and then the one that the port is through, they flex quite a bit. And I was wondering how I would brace that. Well, should have thought about that before I got it together. So I got it together, and it flexed a little more than I'd like. So I just stuck a piece of oil thread through it. Kind of ruined my nice box I was going for, but it's functional. You don't notice it too much. But yeah. So, fuse your wire wherever there's a power source. Back battery, you need a fuse. Front battery, you need a fuse. The alternator run, some people say don't fuse it. Some people say do fuse it. It's better to fuse it just in case. But I don't plan on fusing mine because my alternator's right there and it's going to come straight up into the battery. I mean, it's possible that it could eventually short out on something, but it's pretty unlikely. Now, some people that have their engine in there sideways, front-wheel drive cars, let's say this is the front over here, your alternator's like, I've seen some that are way down in the back, okay, and your battery is way the fuck over there, so you'll have your run either come up the firewall, across the firewall, up to your battery, or you'll have it come up and, you know, this way. Whichever way you run it, if there's a risk of it getting pinched or cut or shorted or even melted through, like fans, if you run it too close to the fan in the front, that could cut it. Exhaust, that could melt it. So if that's the case, you'd want to fuse that. But mine, you know, like I said, it's right there. It's just going to run up and over to there. So, it's a little walkthrough of the wiring. And Northstar AGM Group 31 in the front. We got the 220 in the back. Yeah. Fuse your wire.